thank everyone at Laman Library, Deborah, Jamie, Jeff, and the library itself. When I moved here to Arkansas 40 years ago, this was my library home, and I've had a great affection for it ever since. I tonight have also added a deep appreciation that this library is sponsoring this talk about this book in particular. I did write another book prior to Devil's Knot, but that one unfortunately seems to be kind of buried and over, and this story keeps on going and is still very painful. So thank you to everyone at the library, and now thank you to all of you who have come tonight. Thanks to my dear friends who are here, and to everyone who I don't know who has come out. I really appreciate it. I'm going to try to give you a brief overview of a very, very complex case, trying to do it in just a relatively short amount of time so that we can have time afterwards to discuss it. And there will be things that I leave out, and I'm going to welcome questions and discussion afterwards, okay? So this is the story. And Louise is going to help. It began on May 5th, 1993, in West Memphis. It happened to be the night of a full moon, which one wouldn't think was a big factor, but it turned into a critical issue in this case. 3 8-year-old boys, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch, were found murdered close to where they lived. This is the neighborhood where they lived, and right up in that triangle was a wooded area at that time, and that was where their bodies were found. They disappeared on the evening of May 5th, and they were last seen around dusk riding their bicycles, and it was the next day that their bodies were found. First thing, after an extensive search on the morning after they disappeared, their bodies were found in this ditch, which was really just to divert water that was kept behind the dike along the Mississippi River. But they found the bicycles, and then they next got into the ditch and found their bodies. The bodies were naked, and one of the boys, when they dragged him up to shore, was found to be, appeared to have been castrated. I meant to warn you, this is an autopsy photo, but it's very important because it shows how all the boys were bound wrist to ankle with their own shoelaces. There were countless ways that the police botched the investigation. I'll tell you about the main one, or the most flagrant one, which was that there was a Bojangles restaurant along the freeway, and on it was the nearest public establishment to where the bodies were ultimately found. On the night that the boys disappeared, after the parents had phoned police to say that their sons were missing, the manager of the Bojangles restaurant called police to say that a person had come into the restaurant muddy and bloody and appearing very disoriented, and had gone into the ladies' restroom to clean up. The police sent an officer who just drove through the drive-through and said, they asked if he was still in there. The staff said no, he had left and gone wandering off, whereupon she drove off, and that was the end of that. After the bodies were found, almost 2 days after the bodies were found, the staff here preserved when they heard about that, they preserved the paper towels and a pair of sunglasses that he had dropped into the commode, and expected the police to come back and retrieve these things, and they didn't. So they called the police again and said, hey, you guys want to come by and pick this stuff up? And the police did at that point come and take scrapings from the wall of the blood that he had left in there. Ultimately, it's no surprise that there were trials in this case, and when the trials were held, defense attorneys asked the police, well, what about the evidence that you collected from that man who came into the Bojangles? And the detective said, well, they said, what about what the crime lab said? He said, did you send it off to be analyzed? No, it had never been sent to be analyzed at the crime lab. Why not? Because they said it had been lost. So that's as I say, probably the most flagrant example of how the investigation was botched. But it was in many other ways as well. 1 month after the murders, and in this 1 month's time, you can imagine the terror that reigned in northeast Arkansas, in fact, all along eastern Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, the notion that someone was loose who would kill and maim the 3 children in this way. So parents, school had gotten out, parents were afraid to let their kids out to play. Adults were afraid to go grocery shopping, except in pairs. So there was a great amount of fear, and there was tremendous pressure on the police to do something. A month after the arrests, the police chief, Chief Gitchell here, announced that they had solved the case and 3 teenagers had been arrested. Very famously, when a reporter asked him at this press conference how confident he was that they had gotten the right guys, he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 11. The case hinged on the questioning of this boy, Jesse Miskelly Jr. He was 17 years old at the time. He is borderline mentally retarded. He had been in special ed classes for his whole time in school. By the time he was 17, he had dropped out, and the police knew all of this. They took him in and questioned him for almost 8 hours, by some counts more than 8 hours, with no attorney and no parent present. And during that time, he made several statements, but ultimately, during the course of his interrogation, his questioning, he made self-incriminating statements, and he incriminated two other boys. He implicated Damian Eccles, who was 18 at the time, and Jason Baldwin, who was 16 at the time. Jason and Damian were close friends. They were not particularly close friends with Jesse, but they all knew each other. So let's look at the statement that Jesse Miskelly made to the police. During his 8 hours of questioning, he said that the boys were killed in the morning, that he and Damian and Jason had gone to these woods and killed the boys there in the morning. The police knew that the boys had been in school all day, and that they had not even been missing until after dark. By dint of leading questions and